There is a lot to discuss. Let's meet our panelists. Here in our studio, Irfan Nooruddin is a professor of Indian politics at Georgetown University. Also with us, Sourabh Gupta is a resident senior fellow at the Institute for China-America Studies. Joining us here in Washington, D.C., Shuja Nawaz is a distinguished fellow at the South Asia Center at the Atlantic Council. And from Bethesda in Maryland, Lalit is the chief U.S. correspondent for the Press Trust of India, joining us via Skype. Welcome to all of you. And Lalit, let me start with you. So President Trump goes to India. It wasn't a long visit, as we reported, only 36 hours. But in these two leaders, Narendra Modi and President Trump, we have two leaders of similar mind, both nationalists, both populists. So what was the significance of this visit for these two countries?
The significance was the people building on the people-to-people relationship. In the last 8 months, the two leaders have met 5 times. They have spoken over phone several times. They are trying to build a comprehensive relationship between the two largest democratic countries of the world. Yeah.
Irfan, what was the significance for you with this visit? What did both countries get out of it?
Well, they got a lot of good photographs.
Yeah.
They got bonhomie, hugs. It's important. I mean, symbolism is important, but to be quite blunt, there's no substance to this visit. If you want to think about the strategic relationship between the United States and India, I think there is very little that this trip accomplished to move that relationship forward. Even the deals that were announced have long been expected. They were in play. The big one that we wanted, the trade deal, simply could not materialize. And by all accounts, it's because President Trump didn't think there was enough in that trade deal. So they'll put a good spin on it. It's important for the relationship that the two leaders are seen to like and get along with each other. But the substantive issues that separate the two countries from a deeper cooperation persist.
No big deal in terms of the visit itself, but in terms of strategic significance, just Trump being there sends a message to regional players, doesn't it?
Sure. I mean, it sends a signal that the United States recognizes that India is an important part of the U.S. portfolio of partners in the region, and the unannounced or the unwelcome guest at all of these events, of course, was China, right? What unites India and the United States at this point in time is a common sense that China has to be something that they're trying to work towards and countering, balancing, whatever the language over there. But there is no strategic vision for what that actual cooperation might look like, and so that remains a limiting factor of this. Whatever we want to think of the significance of this visit.
Right, Irfan, you mentioned differences between these two countries. What are those differences?
If you start with immigration, I mean, so one of the interesting things is that for all of the talk of the tighter relationship, the diaspora, which has been the strongest part of it, has taken a lot of blows because of the U.S. tightening of its immigration restrictions, H-1B, etc. That's no longer even discussed. I mean, the Indian government has chosen not to put pressure on it. On trade, everything from the proposed personal data protection bill, which has a lot of American businesses and foreign businesses worried about India's proposed data privacy laws and what this will mean for American businesses, intellectual property rights, the absence after 2 big visits. Remember that back in September, we were talking about Howdy Modi, 50,000 people in a stadium in Houston, and there was supposed to be a trade deal signed there. There still isn't a trade deal over now. And finally, fundamentally, India has chosen what they call a multi-alignment policy. That is that India is going to have lots of friends. And for the United States, its version of geopolitics is that you're either with us or you're against us. And so the United States simply doesn't have a box to put the way India wants to be thought of in this current thing. That's not a difference, but it means that there's a friction that hasn't been resolved yet. And it means that even on things like China, on things like Pakistan, on things like counterterrorism, the two systems don't really know how to work with each other, and that limits the cooperation.
Shuja, Nawaz, one of the neighboring countries that would have been looking at this visit very closely would be Pakistan. In fact, at that rally that we talked about at the cricket stadium, President Trump mentioned Pakistan in his address at the rally. Let's listen to what he said.
The United States and India are also firmly united in our ironclad resolve to defend our citizens from the threat of radical Islamic terrorism. My administration is working in a very positive way with Pakistan to crack down on the terrorist organizations and militants that operate on the Pakistani border.
So, Shuja, President Trump has had something of a tempestuous relationship with Pakistan. Back in 2018, he threatened to withdraw that security aid that the U.S. supplies to Pakistan. He also said that Pakistan does nothing for us. We know that India and Pakistan have been nuclear rivals for several decades. So how will Pakistan be seeing this visit?
Well, not only did he threaten to, but he actually did stop all security assistance to Pakistan, and none of that has been resumed, despite the fact that the United States and Pakistan have been working very closely together in trying to craft some kind of a peace deal in Afghanistan. And so there was unusual euphoria in Pakistan when he praised Pakistan for the first time ever in an Indian setting where a US president said something good about Pakistan. And such fulsome praise has been Mr. Trump's style, because words are cheap and there's really not much action behind it. I think I agree with a lot of what Irfan Nooruddin said, that he was really aiming this more for a domestic audience, particularly for an audience during an election year, because all the data and all the numbers that he quotes are things that assist the United States, puts America first. So two other things that he didn't mention, which relate to trade. One is that India was removed, along with Turkey, an old ally of the United States, from the generalized system of preferences. So it lost something like $5.6 billion of duty-free goods that enter the United States. That was a big loss for India, even though it has a large trade, bilateral trade with the United States of close to $150 billion a year, but still that's a loss. Moreover, any hopes of a trade deal are now talked about even by Mr. Trump for beyond the elections. So there's nothing that's likely to be on the horizon that's going to be positive. This visit remains very symbolic. And I think within India, people will be looking to see what, if anything, happens on the other step that he took, which was removing India, or in a combination of good news, bad news, promoting India from being a developing country to being a middle-income country, and thereby removing it from being a recipient of official development assistance, which is going to cost India dearly in the long run.
Shuja, do you think that those comments he made on Pakistan would have been seen with a little bit of concern, possibly anger, by his Indian hosts? He did, after all, make those comments on Indian soil.
I would have been surprised if some of this had not been telegraphed in advance to India. I think this is, in some ways, not a bad signal to give to countries in the region, that the United States has now dehyphenated the India-Pakistan relationship, and that it will have a separate relationship with India, which is much more global and strategic and regional, and a separate relationship with Pakistan, which remains traditionally transactional.
Sourabh, the other big power in the region, if not in the world, would be China. Certainly the biggest economic power. How would Beijing have seen this visit?
I'd say mildly irritated, not angered, irritated, but watchful. There were provocative things said in the joint statement, mildly provocative, but which Beijing has heard before, in terms of unsustainable debt practices, in terms of we need to be watchful with regard to the South China Sea, et cetera, and that the US now wants to form a link between its newly formed international, development cooperation and whatever Indian aid agency, and do these jointly, the Blue Dot network, et cetera, responsible infrastructure development. All these things, there's no material or actionable plan of what the two sides want to do, but there's quite a lot of harping in ways which are bound to just irritate Beijing.
Certainly a lot of symbolism in this visit, but I'm wondering how much geostrategic rebalancing is going on here, because India, of course, also has very close relations with Russia and buys Russian arms. How would Russia be looking at this?
I think Russia has come to terms to some extent that it is really being elbowed out of that arms market, and that there is a certain degree of natural fit between the US and India in terms of arms sales and interoperability in the Indian Ocean region. After all, The Russians don't have those sort of assets out there, and so it makes sense for the Indians to operate. Of course, it's come at the expense of the Russians, so they cannot be happy about it. But I think the fundamental player who was looking out at these developments is Beijing, frankly, and really not that much to get upset about, but something to be watchful about. Another point, because they did talk in terms of quadrilateral initiative,
right.
and really not much is going to happen also on that front. But these sort of things one needs to be watchful about, particularly if they're expanded beyond the Indian Ocean area and move towards the Asia Pacific waters.
All right, let me get back to Lalit in Bethesda. Lalit, of course, no trade deal between these two countries, but India has pledged to spend something like $3 billion buying American arms, including helicopters. So what does India get out of this?
First I would like to say I don't buy the argument that the President of the United States travels solo to India for 36 hours just for a photo op. It seems to be a little bit far-fetched by the other panelists, my colleagues sitting there. There's lot has been accomplished, lot needs to be done between the two countries. A strategic relationship is one. Energy deal, trade has not been accomplished, but this also reflects that both the countries are just not willing to. The leaders are not willing to compromise on the basic needs of their own countries, right? But they're not letting trade differences come in the way of strengthening their relationship. This is an important aspect of it.
If, as you say, this was a visit that went beyond just mere optics, beyond a photo opportunity, Lalit, what was achieved in your view?
Yeah, you can't come out with the numbers and figures, but still, energy is another important aspect where the two countries are trying to increase their trade relationship in energy aspect. 2 years ago, it was 0. Now it is 6 billion, and this year it's expected to be around 10 billion of energy import from to India from the United States. Defense is another one. Even in the GSP part, even it was withdrawn. The latest figure shows that there has been 5% increase in those aspects of GSP, which were dependent on GSP aspects of it, right? When it comes to taking doles from US, India is now a strong economic power. We don't need aids from any other country. Now we are in US and India now collaborating together in developing and giving aids to other third world countries, right? That's where the collaboration has come about, right? We don't need any aids from the United States.
But by
Anand, if I could just
go ahead,
I
Shuja.
think Mr. Jha needs to look at the numbers. India is probably the 4th largest recipient of overseas development assistance in the world today. So it's a paradox that it's a very fast developing country or a developed country or a middle income country, but it still has a lot of poverty. And the United States has been committed over the years to billions of dollars of overseas development assistance, foreign aid to India. And I think that is going to be a hindrance now in this relationship. I think I agree that the strategic partnership is probably, the groundwork is being laid to develop a strategic partnership. But as Irfan was saying, I think it needs to be better defined in terms of what the objectives are and whether they are congruent, particularly when it comes to balancing, which India has successfully done in the past between its relationships with the United States and with Russia. One other point, I think the military aspect of the Russian relationship is really a service-dependent one, where the Indian Air Force is heavily dependent on old Soviet and then modern Russian equipment. And there's a very powerful lobby within the Air Force to continue that relationship, and that will counter the US's ability to enter that market.
Shuja, just in terms of pure numbers, how does I'll get to you, Lalit, in a moment. How does that designation of India as a developed country affect, how would it impact India?
Well, it removes it from being a recipient of subsidized overseas development assistance, and it sets the tone for other ODA donor countries within the OECD to also cut back on development assistance for India at a time when it still has well over 300 million people living in abject poverty for which it does need assistance?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Jha isn't incorrect. I mean, there's a lot of good news in this relationship. But I think it's important to separate what is strong about the relationship that has been part of this relationship for the last 70 years. Eisenhower went to India in 1959 and had a great visit with Nehru. Kennedy had a famously good relationship with Nehru, et cetera, et cetera. Over the last 10 years, President Obama has invested in incredible parts of his administration, building ties both to Manmohan Singh and to Prime Minister Modi. Trade is good. The real question on the table right now is whether this visit, given that Trump went all the way to India, is going to yield a delta for the relationship that moves the needle on the difficult things. And the answer there has to be no. There's nothing really of substance that this visit accomplished that wasn't already in play. Is it important that Trump was willing to go to India? Sure. But we can't set the bar so low for what has been described by all of these leaders as arguably the most important strategic partnership of the United States. If it is the most important strategic partnership of the United States, India should not be satisfied simply that Trump was willing to go there for 36 hours. They should be demanding more.
Sourabh, I'll get to you in a moment. I just want to get to Lalit. He wants to say something. Go ahead, Lalit.
It's not to demand anything. It's a relationship of friendship, right? It's a relationship of what Modi and Obama said when Modi came here for the first time to meet President Obama. It was the joint op-ed they wrote, "Chalein saath saath, let's walk together." It's not a relationship where you can demand. It's a relationship of friendship, right? And this visit was itself reflective of a strengthening of that friendship.
Sourabh, go ahead.
I just want to add that perhaps this relationship will be defined by what happens in the next 36 hours and not in the past 36. Because frankly, I was surprised why on such short notice has Donald Trump gone to India. You know, he had been invited to the Republic Day, the big occasion, Jan 26th, but he spurned it. Maybe it was to do because of the impeachment hearings. Maybe it was to do because of the State of the Union. But I have been noticing that at the same time, over this last 1.5 months or 1 month while this trip has been in the works, that the Afghan theater has also been in the works and that we'll have an Afghan peace plan coming up very soon. And I also know that in September, Abdullah Bani, who is the Taliban's #2 was supposed to be at Camp David shaking hands with Donald Trump. Maybe in the next 36 hours, we might see Donald Trump going somewhere in the neighborhood and meeting certain people, which was the original purpose of his visit, and South Asia is just to keep folks happy out there.
Shuja, what are your thoughts on that?
I would agree with that. In fact, my information was that a shadow plan was already being prepared before his visit for a surprise visit to a neighboring country. Now, whether that will actually happen or not is unclear. Also, the question of stopping in Kabul to basically strengthen the position of the Afghans so that they could form a unified front and meet the Taliban. And of course, there's the signing on the 29th in Doha, to which Pakistan has been invited to participate. So there's a lot of moving parts. It's unclear how the president will decide, because it's always his decision and not that of his advisors.
Lalit, there's something else I want to address, and this made news all over the world, including here in the United States. President Trump talked about religious freedom in India. This is what he had to say. Let's watch this.
We did talk about religious freedom, and I will say that the Prime Minister was incredible on what he told me. He wants people to have religious freedom, and very strongly, and he said that in India they have worked very hard to have great and open religious freedom.
So, Lalit, President Trump said this at a time when there's been widespread violence by Hindu extremists against Muslims in India. There's also been a growing controversy over this citizenship bill, which is seen as being anti-Muslim. Is President Modi tolerant of all religions?
Yes, indeed, he is. In fact, if you look at all his election speeches, even before 2014, when he got elected, he has been talking about it. He talks about the most sacred text book for him is India's constitution, right? India's constitution talks about secularism. He has always talked about. He never talks about India being a Hindu country or Muslim country. He never talks about he represents the Hindu. He also always talks about 1.3 billion people, and that includes all the major, all citizens of India, Hindu, Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, everyone.
Irfan, what is your view on that?
I do not know whether Mr. Modi, what is in his heart. He does say the right things. His party, on the other hand, has plenty of very prominent leaders, including India's Home Minister, whose statements should be much more forceful in defending secularism and the rights of the minorities. The truth of the matter is that we had the image of the president, his wife, the first lady, the first daughter, being lavished attention in India at the same time that in the capital there are riots. There are shops burning, there are mosques being attacked, and neither the Prime Minister nor the Home Minister nor any other senior leader of the ruling party has made a statement calling for peace, for calm, for tolerance. That is regrettable. And the truth of the matter is that Mr. Trump is not the arbiter of religious freedom. His own record on this is too checkered to take him seriously as to whether or not religious freedom in India is being maintained. But these are the largest and the oldest democracies. They both need to do better for their minorities.
Sourabh, I'm going to talk about one of the bigger picture here. The United States has been talking about a pivot to Asia. We also have the Indo-Pacific strategy. How does this visit fit into all of that?
Oh, it does fit into. We had a separate section in the joint statement on related to the Indo-Pacific. The whole purpose of the U.S. has been, and it's been for a while, was to link India up to its Indo-Pacific strategy, to the U.S.'s Indo-Pacific strategy, and kind of become a cog in that strategy, and all of them together will help constrain China. Obviously, India has not played ball entirely on that. It's what it's said and what it's done are different, and frankly, what Prime Minister Modi himself said at Shangri-La 2 years was very different in terms of the sort of vision he had for the Indo-Pacific. So the two countries have a certain congruence, but there's no neat overlap in their strategies. In fact, the only overlap I would say is actually in the Indian Ocean region, not in the Asia Pacific, in the South China Sea, East China Sea, or the Western Pacific. And they're trying to find ways to kind of harmonize that, and it's turning out to be not an easy process.
Anand, on this point, I'd like to add that the United States has taken India for granted as a junior partner in this relationship, and quite rightly, Indian officials and politicians resent that. So in the Indo-Pacific particularly, the pivot of the US was at a different angle from that of India. I also want to mention, going back to the other issue of religious freedoms, that one of the split screen effects during this visit was the vandalizing of a mosque in Shaheen Bagh in Delhi at the same time as the president was heaping praise on Mr. Modi for allowing religious freedom and giving fulsome praise to the conditions in India under Mr. Modi. I think that was a jarring reminder that India does need to pay much more attention to the largest single Muslim population in the world, which is within its own borders, and not have scenes of police brutality and vandalism come at the same time as it's talking the talk.
Right. Lalit, a very quick response from you. As we heard from Irfan, we don't know what's in Prime Minister Modi's heart, but looking at those very graphic pictures on television, I mean, what kind of a message does that send?
Yeah, what happened in Delhi is not a good. It's very unfortunate. It's not good for the country. But I would like to say this: because everyone wants to look at India both inside and outside. Every India from an Indian perspective, not like a Hindu or a Muslim. Like everyone is a Indian first, then the religion comes first, second, right? That's how you have to look at it. But what happened in Delhi is not good for the country.
Okay, and we have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat, but the conversation continues online. Join us on CGTN America's Facebook page to comment on this or any other show, or chat with us on Twitter at CGTN America. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching. Hello, everybody. I'm Anand Naidu. If you enjoy the thoughtful, engaged discussions you see on The Heat, you may also want to subscribe to our podcast. It's appropriately titled The Heat. Twice a week, we take a deep dive on world headlines, talking to experts, journalists, and others. It's a fresh, focused, and intimate look at the issues that matter most. Whether it's the Hong Kong riots, the latest Middle East conflict, or US politics, The Heat podcast gives the clear context needed to understand both what's going on and why. And what's best, we come to you. Whether you're at home or on the go, you can find the Heat podcast just about anywhere podcasts are found. Just search the Heat CGTN. Have a listen today and subscribe. Thanks.